My name is Amelia Grant, and I'm 29 years old. I've always known my parents could be harsh, but nothing prepared me for the night I realized just how cruel they could be. Not just to me but to the man I loved. That was the night everything changed. I can still remember the weight in my chest as Daniel and I drove to my parents' house that evening. My palms were damp, twisting nervously in my lap. He reached over and squeezed my hand. His smile steady, grounding me like he always did. "It'll be fine," he said softly. "They just need to get to know me." I wanted to believe him. My parents lived in a stately home, 2 stories of pristine white brick, a lawn trimmed so sharply it looked like it had been cut with scissors. It wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of everything they valued. Appearances, reputation, control. As we walked up the steps, I tried to remind myself that tonight was important. My parents had been pressing me for months, asking when they'd meet the man serious enough to take their daughter's hand. I'd held off, afraid of exactly what might happen. But Daniel had insisted. "If we're building a life together, I want them to know. I'm not afraid of them." I wished I could say the same. The door opened, and my mother swept forward in a cloud of perfume and pearls. Her eyes flicked to Daniel, scanning him the way a jeweler examines a flawed diamond. "So this is him," she said flatly. Daniel extended his hand with polite confidence. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Grant." She shook it briefly, her smile tight, before calling over her shoulder. "Richard, come see this." My father appeared moments later, tall and stern, his gray hair perfectly combed. He looked Daniel up and down, lingering on the plain suit Daniel had worn. "This is who you've been talking about, Amelia?" I swallowed hard. "Yes, Dad. This is Daniel." Daniel offered his hand again. "Good evening, Mr. Grant." My father clasped it, but his grip was firm, almost punishing. He didn't say good evening back. We moved into the dining room. The table gleamed with polished silverware, crystal glasses, and a centerpiece of lilies. It was beautiful, intimidating, and cold, just like my parents. Dinner started with small talk, but the undercurrent was sharp. My mother asked Daniel what he did for a living. "I work in non-profit management," Daniel said evenly. "I coordinate resources for community programs, making sure funding reaches schools and shelters that need it most." My mother's eyebrow arched. "So, you don't actually make anything. You just shuffle money around." Daniel didn't flinch. "I'd say we make opportunity possible. It's not glamorous, but it matters." My father chuckled, low and dismissive. "Non-profit. In other words, no profit. And how do you expect to support my daughter on that?" Heat rushed to my face. "Dad." But he waved me off. "I'm just being realistic. Amelia deserves someone who can provide. Not someone wasting time on charity." Daniel's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "I believe success is measured by impact, not just income." My mother laughed lightly, sipping her wine. "That sounds noble. But nobility doesn't pay mortgages." The jabs kept coming. They mocked the car Daniel drove, a modest sedan he'd kept in excellent condition. "Do you plan to pick her up for dates in that tin can forever?" My father sneered. They mocked his upbringing, the fact that he grew up in a working-class family instead of the polished circles they preferred. "No wonder you're so simple," my mother said with a false smile. They mocked even the way he spoke, claiming he lacked polish. I sat there, my fork untouched, every muscle in my body taut with shame and anger. Daniel handled it with grace, answering politely, never snapping, never showing how much it stung. But I could see it in the way his knuckles whitened on his glass, in the faint tightness around his eyes. By the end of the meal, my parents weren't even pretending. As dessert was served, my father leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine. "You're a nice enough young man, Daniel. But let's be honest. You're not a fit for this family. Amelia needs stability, status, someone with real prospects. You don't measure up. The words landed like stones. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Daniel set his fork down carefully. I see, he said quietly. Then he looked at me, his eyes soft despite everything. Amelia, thank you for the meal. Perhaps we should head out. I nodded, blinking back tears, and pushed away from the table. My parents didn't protest. They just sat there, smug and satisfied, as if they'd just saved me from a mistake. Later that night, after Daniel dropped me off, I returned to my parents' house to pick up something I'd left behind. As I stepped quietly through the hall, I heard my father's voice from the living room. She'll never marry him, he said with a laugh. He's not worthy of us. Not now, not ever. My mother's laughter joined his, light and cruel. We'll make sure of it. I stood frozen, the words slicing through me. Not worthy. Not ever. They weren't just mocking Daniel. They were mocking me. Mocking my choice. My love. My life. And in that moment, humiliation turned into something else. Promise. The night I overheard my father call Daniel not worthy didn't just come out of nowhere. It was the loudest echo of something I had known my entire life. My parents had always believed they knew what was best for me, and they made sure I never forgot it. From the time I was little, my parents set the rules. Not just the normal kind, chores, homework, bedtime. I mean every rule. When I was 6, I wanted to wear a bright orange dress with butterflies on it to my cousin's wedding. My mother took one look and shook her head. You'll look ridiculous. You'll wear the blue one I picked. When I was 9, I wanted to try out for soccer because all my friends were doing it. My father folded his paper and said flatly, "Soccer is for kids who don't have brains. You'll stick to piano." That's what respectable families do. It didn't matter what I wanted. It only mattered what they thought would make me, and by extension them, look good. By the time I hit high school, I had learned how to hide pieces of myself. I smiled when they bragged about my good grades, even though I wanted to write stories, not solve equations. I nodded when they told family friends I'd go into law, even though the idea made me feel like I couldn't breathe. I was the good daughter. Quiet one. The one who didn't make waves. But inside the cracks were there. I remember one night when I was 16, sneaking out to a poetry slam at a little cafe downtown. I stood under a single spotlight, reading something raw I'd written about loneliness. When the audience clapped, it felt like oxygen. When I got home, my father was waiting. He held up the flyer someone had given him. "This," he said, shaking it, "is nonsense. You're embarrassing yourself. Focus on real achievements." That was the pattern. Anything I chose for myself was dismissed. Anything they chose for me was law. And every time I tried to push back, they tightened the leash. So, when I met Daniel years later, it felt like stepping into sunlight after years of shade. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't polished in the way my parents would approve of. But he listened. He cared. He saw me not as a daughter shaped by rules, but as Amelia, a woman with her own thoughts, her own dreams. He didn't care that I hadn't gone into law. He asked about my writing, my ideas. He told me my voice mattered. That was new. That was terrifying. And that was exactly why I knew my parents would hate him. Because Daniel represented something they couldn't control. Started small. When I first mentioned his name, my mother's nose wrinkled. Daniel. That doesn't sound distinguished. When I said he worked in non-profit management, my father smirked. So, he's broke. I tried to defend him, but it was like throwing pebbles at a wall. They'd already decided. "You'll see," my mother told me one afternoon as we folded laundry. "This thing with Daniel won't last. You need someone who can keep up with you." "Keep up?" I asked, frowning. She gave me a knowing smile. "Socially. Financially. In every way that matters." The implication was clear. Daniel could never be enough. The weeks after the dinner were heavy with silence. My parents barely mentioned Daniel again, which for them was worse than insults. It was erasure. Until one evening, as I stopped by to drop off some mail they'd left at my apartment, I heard them in the dining room. "He's a much better fit," my mother was saying. "Of course," my father agreed. "Thomas's family has resources. He'd give Amelia stability, the life she deserves." "Not like that, Daniel." I froze in the doorway, heart pounding. I knew who they meant. The son of one of their wealthy friends, a man I had no interest in. And then my mother's voice, low and firm. "We'll make sure she sees it. She always listens to us in the end." I slipped out quietly, the envelope still in my hand, my pulse hammering in my ears. They weren't just mocking Daniel anymore. They were planning to replace him. The morning after I overheard my parents scheming about Thomas, I couldn't focus on anything. My chest buzzed with anger, but underneath it was fear. Fear that maybe they were right, that maybe they'd always have the power to dictate my choices. By the afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I called them and told them I was coming over. When I arrived, they were seated in the living room like they'd been expecting me. My mother set down her tea and looked at me with that polished smile she used when she wanted to control the conversation. "Amelia," she said lightly, "you look tired." "Don't do that," I snapped. "Don't pretend everything is fine." "Heard you. You want to push me toward Thomas. You want me to leave Daniel." My father didn't flinch. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "We're concerned, Amelia. You've always trusted us to guide you. Daniel is not suitable." "Not suitable for what?" I demanded. "For you. Or for me. For the family," he said firmly. "For the future. You deserve someone with stability, with influence. Thomas has that. Daniel does not." My throat tightened. "Daniel has integrity. He has compassion. He treats me with respect. Isn't that what matters?" My mother sighed, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "Darling, those are nice words. But respect doesn't build a home. Compassion doesn't pay for vacations or private schools for future children. We're thinking long-term. You should too." I shook my head, tears burning my eyes. "You don't see him. You don't even try." My father's gaze hardened. "We don't need to try. We know men. And Daniel will never be one we respect." I thought that was the worst of it. I thought the cruel words in the safety of our home were the limit of their disdain. But I was wrong. 2 weeks later, they hosted a family gathering, a dinner with relatives and family friends. They insisted I attend, and when I arrived with Daniel at my side, the whispers started instantly. My mother plastered on a smile. "Everyone, this is Amelia's friend Daniel." Friend. Not partner. Not boyfriend. Just friend. Daniel extended his hand politely to one of my uncles, but before the man could respond, my father interjected loudly. "He works in non-profit, which, as you all know, means no profit." Laughter rippled around the table. My face burned. Daniel smiled faintly, refusing to rise to the bait. "I help manage funding for schools and shelters," he said evenly. "It's about making a difference." But my parents weren't done. "Such idealism," my mother said with mock admiration. "Amelia has always been soft-hearted. I suppose it makes sense. Though I do wonder," my father added, swirling his wine, "how he plans to provide. Amelia has expensive tastes after all." Few guests chuckled. One even whispered, "Poor Amelia." I wanted to sink into the floor. Dinner became unbearable. Every time Daniel spoke, my parents found a way to twist his words into a joke. When he mentioned his car breaking down once, my father said loudly, "Imagine relying on that to get our daughter anywhere." When he spoke about his parents who had worked tirelessly in blue-collar jobs, my mother muttered, "Well, that explains a lot." Each jab was sharper than the last, and what stung most was the way the relatives around us nodded, laughed, or simply stayed silent. No one defended him. No one defended me. By the end of the night, I excused myself to the bathroom just to breathe. I locked the door and stared at my reflection in the mirror, my eyes red, my makeup smudged. I hated myself in that moment, for bringing Daniel here, for letting my parents hurt him, for not standing up louder. When I returned, Daniel was already helping my aunt clear plates, smiling politely, pretending nothing was wrong. But I could see it in his eyes, the weight of every insult. That night after the dinner I broke. Daniel drove me home in silence, his hand resting gently on mine. When we got inside, I collapsed onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I'm so sorry." He sat beside me, his arm wrapping around my shoulders. "You have nothing to apologize for. They hate you," I choked out. "They'll never accept you. They'll never accept us. And I can't keep watching them tear you apart." He tilted my chin up gently, forcing me to meet his eyes. They were steady, calm, but there was something in them I hadn't seen before. Determination. "Amelia," he said softly, "do you trust me?" "Of course I do," I whispered. "Then listen," he said. "Things won't always be this way. They think I'll never amount to anything. But I've been offered something big. And when the time comes, your parents won't be mocking me anymore." My breath caught. "What do you mean?" He leaned back, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "A leadership position. One that changes everything. But it's not official yet, so I can't tell them." "Not yet." I stared at him, my heart racing. For the first time that night, hope flickered inside me. Before we go any further, click subscribe and let me know in the comments. What would you have done in my shoes? The days after that disastrous family dinner felt like moving through smoke. The humiliation clung to me, heavy and suffocating. I replayed my parents' words over and over. The laughter, the whispers, the way they reduced Daniel to nothing while relatives looked on. But Daniel's words cut through the fog. "I've been offered something. A leadership position. One that changes everything." I didn't know what he meant yet, not fully. But the quiet certainty in his voice was enough to spark something in me I hadn't felt in years. Resolve. A week later, we sat at our small kitchen table, coffee mugs between us, the morning sun spilling across the surface. "It's official," Daniel said, sliding an envelope toward me. I opened it carefully, my hands trembling. Inside was a letter of appointment. Executive Director of the Winston Foundation. I blinked, reading it twice. "Daniel, this is huge." He nodded, calm but proud. The Winston Foundation is one of the largest philanthropic organizations in the state. They've trusted me to lead it. We'll be overseeing millions in funding, partnerships with corporations, political leaders, universities. This isn't just a job, Amelia. It's influence. Real influence. I stared at him, a slow smile spreading across my face. "And my parents have no idea." His smile mirrored mine. "Not a clue. They think I'll never amount to anything. Let's keep it that way until the right moment." For years, I had bent under my parents' control. I let them dictate my choices, shape my image, dismiss my voice. But sitting across from Daniel, I realized something. They only had power because I allowed it. "They mocked you because they thought they could," I said slowly. "They've always believed they controlled me, controlled my future. But they don't. Not anymore." Daniel reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "So, the question is, when do we show them?" The answer came sooner than I expected. 2 weeks later, my parents called. My mother's voice was syrupy sweet, too rehearsed. Amelia, darling, we're hosting a dinner with some close family friends. It would mean so much if you came. Bring Daniel, of course. I could hear the unspoken edge in her tone. Prove he belongs or watch him fail again. I glanced at Daniel, who was listening from across the room. He raised an eyebrow, smirking. We'll be there, I said calmly. When I hung up, I exhaled slowly. This is it. Daniel nodded. The perfect stage. The days leading up to the dinner were a blur of planning. Daniel was officially stepping into his role, and though he kept the news quiet, the ripples were already spreading in professional circles. I helped him refine his speech for the foundation's launch event. I researched my parents' business ties, realizing with grim satisfaction that several of their ventures relied heavily on Winston Foundation grants. They've been mocking you, I told Daniel one night, all while benefiting from the very institution you're about to lead. His eyes darkened with determination. Then let's make sure they see it, with everyone watching. There were moments I faltered. Late at night, I wondered if exposing them so directly was cruel, if I was sinking to their level. But then I remembered the laughter at that dinner table, the way my father sneered. Non-profit means no profit, while my mother smirked at Daniel's every word. I remembered how small they made me feel, how invisible. And the doubts turned to steel. This wasn't cruelty. This was justice. The night of the dinner arrived. My parents' house gleamed under soft lights, the driveway lined with expensive cars. Inside, the dining room glittered with crystal and silver, their guests sipping wine and exchanging polite chatter. My parents stood at the center, all smiles and charm, as if the dinner were a performance staged just for them. When Daniel and I entered, the room quieted slightly. I caught the faintest sneer on my father's face, the polite but thin smile on my mother's lips. Amelia, she said, kissing my cheek. Daniel. Her tone was carefully measured, not warm, not welcoming. I do hope tonight will be pleasant. Daniel returned her smile with one of his own. Calm, unshakable, the kind of smile that hinted at secrets. I sat down beside him, my heart steady for the first time in years. They thought they were about to humiliate him again. They had no idea the ground beneath their feet was about to give way. The room was thick with the sound of crystal glasses clinking and polite laughter. My parents were in their element. The hosts, the power brokers, the arbiters of what was worthy. They didn't know the balance of power had already shifted. The meal started innocently enough. Polished silver, roasted lamb, carefully poured wine. Daniel sat calmly beside me. His posture relaxed but confident. My parents introduced him stiffly to the guests. Amelia's friend, Daniel. Friend. Still not partner. Still not worthy of the title. I caught the flicker of amusement in Daniel's eyes, and for the first time I didn't feel small. Felt anticipation. It didn't take long for my parents to return to form. So Daniel, my father began, his voice loud enough for the table to hear. Still shuffling donations at that little non-profit? A ripple of laughter spread. My mother chimed in. It must be exhausting doing so much for so little. I bristled, but Daniel placed a hand lightly over mine beneath the table, steadying me. His voice, when he answered, was calm, measured. It is exhausting sometimes, but fulfilling. And lately, it's been a bit more significant than before. My father smirked. Significant. Enlighten us. Daniel set down his fork, his movements unhurried, and reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a crisp envelope and laid it gently on the table. I wasn't planning to share this tonight, he said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the room. But since you asked. He slid the letter toward my father. My father opened it, scanning the first few lines. His smirk faltered. His eyes darted back to Daniel, then down to the paper again. What is this? He demanded. Daniel smiled faintly. My official appointment. As the new executive director of the Winston Foundation. Gasps echoed around the table. Conversations stilled. Every eye turned to my father, whose complexion had gone pale. My mother leaned forward, snatching the paper. This can't be right." "It is," Daniel said evenly. "I was chosen last month. We'll be overseeing grants, partnerships, and yes, funding allocations. Including, I believe, several programs your family's business currently relies on." The silence that followed was deafening. My father's hand tightened on his wine glass. You mean to say that the non-profit work you mocked is now tied directly to your future?" Daniel finished for him. "Yes, that's exactly what I mean." Gasps turned into whispers. Guests exchanged looks. My uncle coughed awkwardly into his napkin. My mother's smile was brittle, strained. "Well, congratulations, Daniel. I suppose that's admirable." Her voice wavered on the last word. Daniel inclined his head politely, but his gaze was steady. "Thank you. Respect means a great deal, especially when it's earned rather than demanded." The words landed like stones. For the first time in my life, I wasn't shrinking under my parents' gaze. I met their eyes directly. "You mocked him the first time you met him," I said quietly, my voice carrying in the silence. "You laughed at his work, his family, his life. You told me he would never be worthy. Not now, not ever." I let the words hang in the air. My parents' faces were pale, stiff. "But tonight," I continued, my voice firm, "you'll look at him differently. Because whether you like it or not, Daniel is the man you'll answer to now." Whispers. The sound of someone's fork clattering to the table. My father's jaw clenched. My mother's lips trembled. For once, neither of them had a word to say. The rest of the evening was a blur. Conversation limped along, forced and awkward, with guests stealing glances at Daniel, not as the man mocked for his modest car or his working-class family, but as the new head of one of the most powerful foundations in the state. When the dinner ended, my parents tried to regain control. My mother's voice was overly sweet as she hugged me stiffly. "We're so proud of you, darling. And of Daniel, of course." But her eyes betrayed her. Shock, shame, the dawning realization that the world she controlled so carefully had slipped out of her grasp. That night, as Daniel and I drove home, I stared out the window, my chest lighter than it had felt in years. "They mocked you the first time," I whispered. "They made me feel small. But tonight, you showed them." Daniel squeezed my hand. "No, Amelia. You showed them. By standing with me. By choosing us over their control." I smiled, tears prickling my eyes. For the first time I believed him. My parents may never love him the way they wanted me to love Thomas, the wealthy puppet they'd chosen. But they respected him now. They had to. And me. I was no longer the obedient daughter shaped by their rules. I was the woman who chose her own path, and proved them wrong. If this story struck you, and you want more tales of betrayal, justice, and revenge, subscribe now, because the next one may hit closer to home than you think.